what are covenants? Like, why do we make them? Covenants pertaining to the religious sense.
Promises we make with God.
Good. For what promises we make with God for what purpose?
In exchange for blessings.
In exchange for blessings. One thing that's really important is that we become one with Him. And what does He promise us in the covenants, generally speaking? I don't know if we recalled what I talked about, but what is prepared in the covenant? Come on in. Welcome, welcome. We're just starting.
Hello.
We're just going over last week's lesson on what we talked about. You guys have anything to, I know you're just jumping in, but I'm asking people what they remember from last week, what stands out to them. Oh, you weren't here last week? Okay. Gotcha.
We were both
Well.
tired last week.
Does someone want to kind of rehash a little bit what they thought about last week's lesson or what they learned for Jerem?
I remember something about an angel. Of course, there's a picture of the slide, and there are a whore. I remember that.
That's right. The whore is the symbol for tyranny. In fact, tyranny, when the scriptures talk about, the whore, the great abomination, the mother of all abominations, the whore, the harlot, tyranny actually comes from the word etymologically, whore or harlot. So kind of thinking back to the scriptures are alluding to this power that exists on earth, right? To destroy the freedoms of all people through power, through worldly power. And I talked about how Christ, He not only came to deliver us from sin in His covenant, but also that enable us to become free from other worldly powers. Now, we can go on to a discussion of that for a long time, but I just wanted to point out that that was something that our forefathers, or at least the prophets of old in the Book of Mormon especially, they recognized that covenant relationship with God required them to be separate from the abuses of the Lamanites, who would often come to usurp their liberties and their religion and their rights and privileges. So, likewise, bringing that back to us, we make covenants, right, to love and serve other people, and we make further covenants in the temple and receive further knowledge. And if we pay attention to those things, we'll learn that yes, indeed, Christ is powerful to deliver us from those wicked powers, not only from within but from without. Okay. Now we're going to talk about. So we have promises, covenants we make with God. We're going to talk about now the relationship not between us and God necessarily, but us and other people. Okay. We're going to talk about contracts, constitutions, compacts. Those are agreements we make with one another to bind us, to bring us together in one purpose, for the purpose of our own well-being. That's something we do naturally, right? We often congregate together, in similar groups, and we want to be able to help one another. I'd hope so. I hope we entertain that desire, the human desire. And we can find that this, when you break it down, a constitution is just an agreement that we make with one another to defend one another, to love and serve one another. Okay? Now, the Lord spoke. You can see what He said in Doctrine and Covenants 101 concerning the constitution of this land. Okay? Who wants to read this quote by the Lord? Isaac.
The laws and constitution of the people, which I have suffered to be established, should be maintained for the rights and protection of all flesh, according to just and holy principles. It is not right that any man should be in bondage one to another.
Okay. So the laws and constitution of the people which I have suffered. Who knows what this word means, suffered? Allowed. So the Lord allowed this, and in fact justifies us to have laws and constitutions or agreements with one another that should be maintained for the protection of each other. Okay, what else stands out in this verse?
Purpose of laws and constitutions are for the rights and protection of all flesh.
All flesh. All right.
Which reinforces the basic principle of, man and woman, black and white, bond and free. All flesh have equal rights to the protection established by laws.
See, yeah.
Respect of persons, everyone should be free and safe.
And then what is it about this phrase? It is not right that any man should be in bondage one to another. How does that relate to establishing laws and constitutions?
Well, the time period for Joseph Smith was just before the Civil War?
A little bit before, 30. I don't know exactly when that was written, but
That concept would be relevant to pretty much every past society in the world. Slavery's been really common throughout the history of the world. And the knowledge of principles that come from God of what is right and what is wrong make a huge impact on our lives, on fairness of the laws that we create, on how well we can deal with it.
good. I like that.
I wonder if the word bondage goes beyond ownership of another person, but also to debt. Other forms of bondage, like people would come here, if you come here to America, you don't have passage to pay, you become an indentured servant to somebody who paid your passage, and you are in effect you're in bondage to them until you paid off your debt in a sense. But I guess when we talk about employer-employee relations, there were people who were in effect in bondage to the company's store, so to speak. They couldn't make hardly enough in their job to pay for their housing and food. So there's other kinds of bondage
Well, for sure.
that we might say is legal because they agreed to it. But
But is it
coercive.
right?
It was coercive.
Yeah, that's something that you would hear Thomas Jefferson point out a lot. Thomas Jefferson opposed the idea of a national bank, because a national bank, the idea of a national bank with Hamilton and Clay and later Abraham Lincoln and so on and so forth, you would be able to make a national bank to pay for, it would accrue debt, but it would be good in the sense that you would be able to pay for whatever public, internal public service you might want to pay for, like roads or bridges or this or that. Not necessarily prescribed by the Constitution, but the idea that bondage, Thomas Jefferson drove all the time that if you're to create a national bank, you're going to have a bondage that will sell our rights of government over to foreign parties, companies over the seas, bankers in foreign seas, like particularly the National Bank were subsidiaries from the Bank of England. But that's economics that I'm not really sure exactly how they all work, but I do know today we have a national bank, Federal Reserve. We're massively in debt towards them, and we are therefore, our government is in bondage to, they have to appeal to the people who we borrowed money from. That's a private company, the Federal Reserve, and unless we do what they want.
Well, here's an example. You go to an African or South American country and you build a dam. The World Bank pays some money necessary to build a dam and hydroelectric power, which they force the villagers to buy. And they also take away from the villagers their right to the waters at the same time. Except that they buy the water through the utility system, which impoverishes everybody who, maybe beforehand, they had a no-cost existence, but now they have an existence where you have to pay for what they got for free before. Or we might be developing their natural resources for them, but to their detriment.
Right. So, yes, bondage, the idea of holding another man's will in your own power, that's not right, because ultimately the destiny of government is to set ourselves free. Okay? We're not supposed to, the purpose of forming societies, I wouldn't form a society for my own detriment, right? I wouldn't come into, let's say we're all just forming our own society, right? We can call it whatever we want. We go out in the wilderness, okay? We're not going to form an organization that oppresses this half of the room. That they wouldn't agree on that, right? We'd all have to be in agreement for something in common good. And we do that on our own free will. Okay? So the idea of government is that it sets us free and we're able to defend ourselves, and it makes us more able to cooperate with one another. It's much better that we work together than alone, is it not? Okay? So we talked about how the Lord allowed our Constitution to be established. He, as it says, that he brought up wise men, okay, taught them just principles, and they were able to form as best as they could. It's still a man-made government, but they were still able to form as best as they could a government for that end, that we might not be in bondage one to another. We can see how that's not the case today, but let's keep going. Let's talk a little bit more about that relationship between man to man, that the purpose of government, okay? And what does it mean to be a ruler over one another? Okay, let's go ahead and read that. Who wants to read it? Go ahead, Angie, right?
Yep.
Okay, go ahead.
Every government which we know all this day in the world was established by the wisdom and force of mere men. Here then is the natural limitation of the magistrate's authority.
Pause. Do we know what magistrates means?
I think it's a dignitary leader, but I'm not entirely sure what a magistrate is because we don't really have one.
It's a chief or director. So in our terms, that could be just like a president or a
So
representative.
it's a general term, not a specific.
Yeah, it's just a general term. Okay, so whoever is in a seat of authority. Okay, so here then is the limitation of a ruler's authority. Okay, go ahead.
He ought not to take what no man ought to give, nor exact what no man ought to perform.
Okay. He ought not to take what no man ought to give, nor exact what no man ought to perform. Do we know what this term exact means? Require, okay? So, people in authority cannot take what no man ought to give. Think about that. Nor require what no man ought to perform. How do we see this? How do we understand this? What does it mean to take what no man ought to give?
Well, if you shouldn't give something, like if you have something that's personal to you that you wouldn't give to somebody else, you wouldn't ever do that. Then somebody else shouldn't come and say, oh, you have to give me this thing and take it.
Okay. How is that in relationship to governments?
Well, free will. You should never give that to somebody else. And
Or-
so you should never take it.
Or our own property, right? If we're innocent of any crime and we owe no man nothing, is it proper for someone else to take from me. Okay? Is it proper that I have to have a license to dig a hole on my own property? Or that I have to build my house to a certain specification, otherwise I'm fined heavily for it? Or maybe do I have to have a license to perform my own business? That's obviously a question of whether or not is it right for us to deprive each other of those things? So why is it right for a magistrate to do those things, a ruler to do those things? We often become distracted and enchanted by the authority of someone above us and say, oh, we have to do what they say, but is that really the case? Let's keep going.
Thinking about constitutional things, ideas like this, I actually used to wonder, like, why it would be right for you to be required to have a driver's license to drive on the road. Right, it makes sense, and then I kind of realized, oh, well, the roads aren't my property. So it's part of the city government to make things work well together. Kind of similar for you buy property in a city, you're paying in a way for permission to hook into the city utilities. Well, then it kind of makes sense if you have to have a city license to dig a hole where you might disrupt the utilities, right?
Maybe. I mean, if you think
To
about
some-
it, everything
to some degree, right?
everything publicly is paid for myself, right? By myself and my equal. So what we're saying is, in order to use my own property, my own vehicle, a private company had to build that road.
Right,
And
but the land is the city's.
but what is this?
But
The
this
city
isn't,
is
this
just
isn't contrary to what you're saying. It's part of the structure, right?
Okay.
If I'm part of a city, I'm part of the city's government. I obey the city utilities so that the utilities work. That doesn't mean that my rights are taken away in that respect. But if it gets out of hand, if I can't even dig a hole in a place that is obviously like safe and not a city easement, well, right,
Yeah,
there's a
no
problem. There's too much law there, getting in the way of our personal freedom.
it's a very precarious situation, because when we start to allow a power of private people, okay, a city is just, well, who's the city?
Organization of
It's
people.
just an organization of people, private people, right, that was there to do a job. And if we do build on top of a line, well then yes, let's fine ourselves for, if we break something that's not ours,
Right.
we should be able to pay for it. But to be able to pay into the permission just to dig a hole that doesn't necessarily break
Right.
the line,
Right.
I don't know. Personally, I don't agree to have that license, but that's just my opinion.
And, I wouldn't want to pay for the license either.
No.
It doesn't really make sense.
I mean, if I want to dig a hole, I'd say, hey, is it clear,
Yeah.
right? I
Yeah.
think, but the license prevents bad things from happening, right? It tries to, at least.
And it didn't necessarily mean the license should be paid for, it's just,
Yeah.
just the general concept.
But, anyways, let's go on.
Yeah.
All he was given is given him. All those that gave it must judge of the application. In the government, there is no such relation as a lord and a slave. Lawless will and blind submission. Blind
Mhm.
submission, nor ought to be amongst men. But the only relation is of the father and the children, patron and client, protection and alliance, benefaction and gratitude, mutual affection and mutual assistance.
Okay, there's a lot of words there, but he's trying to describe the relationship between one who rules and one who obeys. Okay? Understood in a just manner. Okay? There is no such relation, speaking of governments, as lord and slave, lawless will, and blind submission. In other words, in government, it's not proper to have a lord and slave, or to be bound to the to the will of another person, and be blindly submitting to him. What is the sort of relationship we expect among men, among each other? His thought was between father and children. A father cares for his children, no? Patron and client. Okay? Who is the servant in this case? Are we made for the service of the ruler, or is the ruler made for the service of us? Protection, allegiance. If they offer us protection from evils, from usurpations, then naturally we ought to owe them allegiance. But if they don't offer us protection, if they expose us to evils, do we owe them that allegiance? Do we owe them gratitude? Do we owe them assistance if they are there only to abuse and to eat out our substance, to tax us arbitrarily, or to establish this and that code of law that we must obey, otherwise we're fined? Okay? There's no such relation. We have to remember the relationship that exists in government, that should exist in government, is the same relationship that should exist amongst ourselves. Remember the covenant that we made with God, that we make with, I hope that we make with God, to love other people and to serve them. Is it right then to require in our relationships among men certain orders or certain acts which abuse that? I don't think it would be right to control the private will of innocent persons. I have no business over. I'm not going to tell you whether or not you can burn your wood in your backyard, so long as, if you do damage to my property, then I'll pursue legal course, but I'm not going to fine you for it. I'm not going to arrest you. You're selling milk from a cow? I'm going to get the agents of the federal government to come seize your property, which has happened before, because they didn't have a license. Is that really loving and caring that we support these institutions which oppress us in that manner? Or maybe, is it right to deprive each other of our own means of self-defense, particularly against the powers that be? I don't know. How do you see this?
Well, when you see someone selling tamales at Food City parking lot, it's probably illegal. But
Probably.
am I gonna buy them?
If you think they're good. Yeah.
Take a flyer on that, they're pretty good. Or, if you go to the, salvage yard and you realize that none of the employees don't look as English, it occurs to you that, these people are working illegally, but do I care?
Depends how you view yourself, your relationship to those people, right?
We have 5 million illegal immigrants into the country. Do any of them have work permits? Can they get jobs anywhere legally? Or should there not be those kinds of rules? in the first place? I mean, yeah, so that's the big question. Should
Yeah.
there be border walls? You know, I guess there's an argument that there, why should there be? But on the other hand, if you want to maintain some orderliness in your society,
Then I hope you have a government that punishes crime, right?
or, yeah,
Or is effective for that, right?
because I guess here you might have systems where you would want all the people that in your state to get discounted tuition. You do give the discounted tuition to people who aren't here lawfully. I mean, that's one of the propositions on the ballot this election cycle. But it raises a lot of questions, or a lot of problems, because who's paying? Or how do you accommodate that if you're gonna teach them in their own language in your schools? That you have to, you know, can the schools handle the education of these children when they don't speak English? They're coming.
Yeah. Reminds me when you said, is it legal to sell tamales? I think, wasn't there a restaurant in Mesa
Yeah.
that was, there's like a backyard, was it Backyard Taco, was it that, or what was it? There is a Mexican
Chuy's.
family, what was it?
Well, there was a small local chain called Chuy's, that place in Tempe and Mesa, I forget where they were now, but there were several of them. And, because they hired illegal immigrants in the
Oh.
back, they were shut down, went out of
Gotcha.
business. But they had really good, kind of California
Yeah.
fish fry kind of stuff, so it was really pretty good.
I know there's a popular franchise here. It was originally, the recipes and everything were owned by this Mexican family, and eventually the police came in and shut them down because they didn't have any licenses or business licenses.
Okay.
Their business was then franchised and acquired by someone else, as far as I'm aware. So,
And I suppose this gets into a whole other area.
okay,
Distribution of wealth,
right. Is it right for us to?
because the more rules that you have in place, the more unequal the distribution of property becomes. Because the
more you
rules
try
can
to-
be used,
The more you try to redistribute the property, the more unfair things become, because then you're not making your own property, all of your own property is then being given out to other people, and that, it doesn't work, then there's no motivation for you to then keep your property and to make more property.
well, I was just trying to make the point that
It gets more unfair.
when you have, the purpose of things like corporations, limited liability companies, is to allow for the formation of capital for investors. The flip side of that, though, is that it results in an unequal distribution of wealth among the population by having protections from liability and that sort of thing.
Right.
Because people can do wrong and then not be held responsible for their damage.
It's just the corporation,
Or we could say, like Pfizer and Moderna,
right?
they're exempt from any liability from the harm that they cause. In allowing them to make billions of dollars.
Off of our own detriment, right?
With no regard to the damage they do, because they're not responsible for any damage they do.
Okay. Just remember the relationship we have with one another should emulate the relationship that God requires us to have with one another. Okay? And you can, I think everyone can ask for themselves what that would mean in government, right? pertaining to socialism or to this question, that question, right? Let's go on. So these are amendments proposed to the Constitution, the one that was adopted after the Articles of Confederation, okay? That's a funny thing. The Founding Fathers would have regarded the Articles of Confederation as the Constitution. And in fact, when they ratified the Constitution, there's no mention made of abolishing it, the Articles of Confederation. So there's an argument to be made that it's all the same. But let's go ahead and go on to so these are proposed amendments. Of course, we can see the spirit of these kind of instituted to our own amendments now. And these aren't like obscure opinions. These are opinions and beliefs that were widespread and well known and defended by people of that generation. So let's go ahead and just read from 1 to 3. Who wants to read? What was your name?
Andrew.
Andrew, go ahead and read 1.
There are certain natural rights of which men, when they form a social compact, cannot deprive or divest their posterity.
Stop. Okay? There are certain natural rights. Everyone familiar with that concept, natural rights? Rights given to us by nature or nature's God, right? What are the things that God gave us? Okay? Agency, life, and then some would argue that the fruits of our labor too, property, okay? These are things which should be our own. So when they form a social compact meaning like a covenant or something that binds us, an agreement that binds us together, when they come together to make a society, okay, there are these certain rights we cannot deprive or divest one another, especially our children, our posterity. Okay, keep going.
That, among which are the enjoyment of life and liberty, with the means of acquiring, possessing, and protecting property, and pursuing and obtaining happiness and safety.
Okay. Keep going. Number 2.
That all power is naturally vested in and consequently derived from the people. The magistrates, therefore, are their trustees and agents, and at all times amenable to them.
Okay. What do we understand from number 2?
And people have the power. The government takes the power from the people, or the will of the people.
Right. The government's authority is from the permission of the people who formed it. Okay. Magistrates, meaning again the rulers, therefore are their trustees. Trustees, what is that? What does it mean to be a trustee?
You help manage something.
I'm sorry?
You help manage something.
Okay. But in relation to an agreement, like let's say I contract you to paint my house. I trust you to paint my house. What happens if you don't paint my house? Obviously, I would probably not pay you and probably fire you, right?
Yeah.
So magistrates are in the same sense, right? We put them there with a purpose, an express purpose. Good.
I was going to say that in today's business world, the term trustee carries with it burdens that exceed the normal, responsibility we have as I guess citizens. A trustee actually has a duty to care for the welfare of the persons under his care. In other words, he has there's a higher standard of duty to the beneficiary.
Right.
And so if they're using the word trustee, I'm thinking, well, this goes beyond just each man standing alone as equals. No, the trustee actually has what they call it, there's a term called fiduciary relationship or a fiduciary duty to care for the person, like a parent does for the child. To act only in the benefit of the beneficiary.
Right. So.
Maybe, something.
Right. I mean, the idea you're driving at is they don't serve their own purpose. They're not there to do their own will. They're there to do the will
But,
of those who put them there, right?
or
To do the duty, the job.
you gotta protect the interests of the beneficiary.
Right. So if we form or government and we all say, okay, let's just say SIE, you're gonna be charged of making sure at night our cattle are defended. We'll help you out with that, you know. We'll freely give you of our own substance to help you, you know, we'll pay you, right, for that purpose. Okay, what happens if our cattle at night need to be protected from robbers or from wildlife? What happens if, you know, SIE starts doing that job, he does it well, first week, okay? Second week he gets a little complacent. He starts to do things, he starts to slack off on his obligation. And one morning we discover, a couple of our animals are gone. We're gonna hold him accountable. Hey, where's our livestock, which we paid you to protect? Are we obligated to keep paying him more money to do his lazy job, or should we correct that? And if he continues to do that, should we replace him? Or maybe form a different sort of agreement? Maybe it should be 2 people, 3 people. This can be likened into government. Can we not see that? When we institute certain officers for our own protection, and they slack off, or they start doing the things of their own will and volition, and it's harmful for us, and it deprives us, and the things they do explicitly take from our own property with our own consent. Go ahead.
The example that you gave was a very clear-cut example, but I think that in most of the other things, it's not so clear-cut as you're clearly slacking off and not doing your job. You don't necessarily know if that's the case most of the time. Like, how would you know if an officer was like just kind of slacking off unless
Unless it was written down somewhere, right? Well,
Well, I guess nowadays, I was at buying a tool today, and I guess the standard there when you buy something over the counter is that it should be, there's no guarantee on the quality of the product, I guess I should say. So they can sell you a warranty for 1 or 2 years. Or you can just accept that they've sold you something that is merchantable, that is, it's supposed to be in working condition, and they give you a chance to return it if it's not working. And in the case of watching for your cattle, the question then is, was he acting reasonably, or did he guarantee that you wouldn't lose cattle if you would hire him? See, so there's, I guess, in our society, there's this reasonableness standard that's been created. That maybe he's not responsible for the loss of the cattle, but you don't have to keep paying him. You can find somebody else to
Yeah.
do a better job.
Because if he's not slacking off, and there was really nothing that he could possibly have done to save the
right,
cattle,
right.
Yeah.
then would he still be held responsible?
You bring up very good points, and of course, if it was outside of his ability or power, and he was doing all of his duties and reasonably,
But if you had found out that he had gone into town,
right?
you know, he took the night off because he figured there's no risk.
By the way, I don't think you would do that.
But if he was there, and, I don't know, the guy hit him over the head or something,
Then that-
the cattle,
Yes.
like,
Mhm.
it's not his fault that he's human.
Yeah, I agree, and I think you would be interested in reading a book called The Whole Duty of Man. It's written by one of the founders, I guess, you know, inspirations. Samuel Pufendorf, he wrote all about that, of what it means to be responsible or to be dutiful towards one another. And he talks about all of that, all the different cases. It's cool, you should look it up. But I also like the point you brought up on how do we know, where is it written down? How do we know if someone's like what defines that, obviously, right? We'll get into that in the next
Written
slide.
agreements.
Right. Let's just go on to the next one. That's good.
Sorry.
No, I mean, the next point I just wanted to point out that we should and ought to, that is our responsibility to make sure our people who we institute in seats of authority, that we are the sovereign, okay, over them. The reason why we are said to obey your governors is because they serve and protect us. Okay, well, now that's something I could talk about for a long time more, but let's just keep going. Oh wait, this is not the slide. This is a website. Okay, there we go.
I was just thinking of the classic example of A Bug's Life, where the ants hired the grasshoppers originally, several generations back or something,
Mm-hmm.
to protect them. Huh?
This Laura, I thought they just came there and bullied them. I didn't know they got hired.
It sounded like they were originally meant to protect the ants.
The
But
deep movie.
they overstepped their
Yeah, I
bounds
remember
and
that.
became the
I
tyrants.
think it's just Harper just came
I
and
can
lied.
see-
He's just saying he's protecting, but it's really just, I want you.
I don't know if there was an agreement before,
Yeah.
We talk about the.
cause it
the
never
book
says
version.
anything
Pixar's Ants.
specifically, but
The movie.
I don't know, it could go either way. Let's assume
Just
that
an
it does,
illustrative
just for
example.
your point.
Yeah, it was just an illustrative example. Like, you don't want your sheep protectors to start bullying you, right? It doesn't make sense. But you have to keep it in check.
Right. Now, this quote answers Angie's question. Who wants to read it?
I'll read it.
Angie, go ahead.
The advantages of a written constitution, considered as the original contract of society, must immediately strike every reflecting mind. Power, when undefined, soon becomes unlimited. But when their sovereignty is
Confessedly.
vested in the people, the government becomes a subordinate power. It ought to therefore be so constructed that its operations may be the subject of constant observation and scrutiny. There should be no hidden machinery nor secret spring about it.
This quote is talking about the advantages of a written constitution, of a written agreement.
Because if you don't say it and you just assume people are gonna listen and things, and then the con artist gets in there and goes,
Yeah. Like if I say, Jose, watch over my cattle, what does that mean? I haven't really explicitly defined that. I haven't said, he can't go out into the town as long as the cattle are locked up. There has to be a written expectation. At least it's expedient that there is a written expectation between those who we institute. Notice his relationship. Notice how he calls us the sovereignty. And who is the subordinate power? The government. He'd in fact say later on in the book that if the sovereignty, if the supreme power, the sovereignty means supreme power, okay, or authority, okay? If the sovereignty were moved from the people onto the government, that this would, if they're the most powerful ones, if they can tell us what to do without necessarily our agreement, then that government is not free and becomes despotic. Now, we can kind of see, I hope we see the importance of the government has to be subordinate. Now, whether or not you see the government today as subordinate to us can be determined by how many arms, or how powerful they are in arms. That's something that he'd say. If the people were, I'm paraphrasing this, but if the people were to give up their arms, that's the reason why he'd say that liberty is well on its way or already destroyed. Okay, so people are supreme over their governments, okay, and we hold them responsible. Now, what do we hold them responsible to? A written constitution that is constructed or made in such a way that whatever the government whatever the government does can be referred to by constant observation and scrutiny upon that document. Okay, so how does this relate to the constitutions of this land?
Well, it is written, and it's well defined exactly what everything is meant to do and
Mhm.
how it's supposed to run.
Hmm?
Everyone knows what is and isn't allowed.
Or at least should, right?
Yeah. But it's openly out there for.
Yeah, it's written right there. Jefferson would say, and Madison, I'm not sure which one was which, but basically the Constitution, speaking of the federal Constitution, is written in such a way that there are no implied powers. I think Madison said there are some implied powers, but it never extended beyond what was expressly written. We can get into that when we talk about what's written inside of it, but the idea is that the Constitution, the law, right, or the agreement, so the Constitution is not so much limiting us, but limiting the people in government, okay? It outlines what they can or cannot do, okay? Now, if they were to go against that agreement, if they were to go outside the bounds of that written agreement, what does this mean? Does it mean that we become subject to their own will? Okay. Coming back to this, there should be no hidden machinery nor secret spring about it. Constitution, a good one, it shouldn't be obscure. It should be written in such a way where there's no question about it. Today, obviously, there are a lot of questions about it, and that could be explained by we don't understand it.
There shouldn't be any fine print though, or the little tiny things snuck in there that just, they don't need to be there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anything else? Any other thoughts? Does that make sense though? Does this make sense to you?
It makes sense in and of itself. I don't entirely see how it fully relates to what we were talking about before though.
How do we know if SIE is accountable for the things he did?
Right.
If we can hold him accountable.
Only if it was written out
Right.
properly,
So-
clearly and concisely.
Right. So if we have a written constitution, we can hold our representatives or people who we appoint responsible if they were ever to do something not prescribed explicitly by the Constitution. That's when we can hold them accountable to their oaths. Okay, that's when they go beyond the law and become a law unto themselves and assume unto themselves the right to rule over other people. Because again, we never gave them that duty or power, so how could they take it from us? Except were it by force or by deceit or fraud. Okay? So Jefferson is going to talk about how am I going to relate this? What if we were not to know, again, week 5 and 6, we're going to talk about the specific things written in the Constitution so we can identify what is and not prescribed for our rulers to do. But if we were not to know the limits of our Constitution, and we were to allow people to go beyond the bounds of the Constitution, Jefferson explains what the state would become. Let's go ahead and read this. Who wants to read it? Nathan.
And this is the tendency of all human governments. A departure from principle in one instance becomes a precedent for a second.
Stop. What does that mean? A departure from principle in one instance becomes a precedent for a second. Think in terms of an agreement we make with one another.
Yeah, you disrespect one line in the agreement, that line apparently has no value, and so it gets disrespected again and again.
Or it just opens up a whole new universe of powers that they can delve into. Like, oh, you allowed me, sure, without your express consent, but you allowed me to go into the town. What else can I do?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
That-
one way to put it is, for the longest time, I don't remember the exact term, but like a president has never called for emergency executive powers. But something happened and then a president is saying, okay, I'm gonna call for these emergency powers now.
Mm.
And then he leaves his office, and then the next guy shows up, and something happens, and then it's that much easier, and there's less backlash when that next president says, hey, I'm establishing these emergency executive powers now, and then the next president comes in and does the same thing over and over and over.
And now
So
we've
it's
got,
just-
what, 30-some states of emergency that are just permanent?
Exactly, and now we're at a point where like, there are all of these illegal presidential powers in effect,
Mm.
all because one president decided to set a precedent, a negative precedent,
Right.
in calling for these executive powers.
Good point.
That's what it leads to.
And it was very clearly noted by our founding fathers that the president were to have no such authority to pass any sort of executive order or declaration, as they called it, outside of the Constitution. The powers of the president are very few.
Yeah.
And so anything that he does, he declares, is within those bounds. But if you were to declare something, I want to seize all livestock for the sake of emergency. I'm gonna cure so much barrels of oil for a national emergency. I require this and that because of an emergency. Is that prescribed in the agreement? Sure, it might be, it might be comfortable to do that. Oh yes, go ahead, because we're scared and we need protection. But let's keep going.
That second for a third, and so on, till the bulk of the society is reduced to be mere automatons of misery, and have no sensibilities left but for sinning and suffering. Then begins indeed the bellum omnium in omnia, which
Stop.
some philosophers.
Yeah, keep going. Sorry, I was going to explain so, bellum omnia, omnium in omnia means the war of all against all.
Okay.
Okay. Then begins indeed the war of all against all, which some philosophers observing, keep going.
To be so general in this world, have mistaken it for the natural instead of the abusive state of man.
He's referring to Thomas Hobbes, thinking that it was the natural state of man to be in a state of war against each other, but
Chaos, anarchy.
But Thomas Jefferson and others believe that that was not the case. The natural state of man is, yes, there is the natural man, of course, but everyone within ourselves knows to do good. Okay?
Sunshine and shadow.
So he observes that this state, bellum omnium in omnia, is procured by those in power. Okay? That's the natural tendency of human governance. If we don't chain that monster down that I referred to last week, if we don't chain that monster down to some sort of law or agreement, that they're there very easily, very ready, because who do we know who we're warring against? Okay? Who is the tempter? He is working constantly to this end, a war of all against all. We read this in the Book of Mormon. Gadianton's destroyed the government of the Nephites and Lamanites. Okay. Isaiah prophesied in his latter days that we would be in a state of war, one with another, neighbor against his brother. Uh-oh.
It reminded me of that scene I read recently, that was in the end times, those that wouldn't take up arms against their neighbors would have to flee the their safety design. Or the other scripture that comes to mind is the one about Calvinus that says, it's the nature and disposition of almost all men, it's because they have a little authority, as they suppose, that we need to exercise our rights as dominion. So, yeah, the monster that you have to chain down is that sense that I have power and authority.
Right. And our Constitution is there, it's intended to be there for our own reference. Okay? We have our own town charters, you know, city constitutions, we have our state constitution, we have a federal constitution. They're all written for us to refer to bind those in power to them. Okay?
I have a problem with this.
Okay, go ahead.
So if some philosophers are saying that warring is the natural state of man, that makes sense to me.
Okay.
That it would be the natural state of man. As human beings, our duty is to cast off the natural man, cast off the tendencies to want to war and want to do all of the bad things with each other, and to become more godlike and to adopt all of those good principles that we need and want in order to actually function together in society.
I think here we have to differentiate between our use of the word natural and the use of the word natural in a scriptural context. Where in a scriptural context, natural is carnal is never good. Whereas here, I think they're saying that it's the average, the default.
But if the
Which is
default is what
kind
we
of-
were before,
I would
it
say the
wouldn't be that
default is that we
natural.
have sunshine and shadow, but yeah, it's kind of the default if we don't try.
Well, think about it like this. Originally, yes, and we can refer this back to any sort of society that's made. We have a tendency to want to form those societies for our own benefit. That's natural. I mean, you do have, and if we go back to the story of Adam and Eve, it was natural for the parents to institute a government for the benefit of their children. But you would have those like Cain who would want this state of conflict.
If I understood what we were reading, what they were setting up was this idea that if you have an oppressive overseer, the consequences that those below are, of course, they're not going to be able to fight the power, but they will fight whoever's weaker. Or in other words, you take out your frustration on those that are weaker than you, and that causes this society in general is going to be a war.
Right.
Because the head of that structure
Is that monster?
is the one that's creating this cascade down to the general populace. And so I would say that, yeah, that's probably natural in the sense that it would be normal, because the person who can usurp the power at the top is going to do that by force, which is going to set a pattern for everybody underneath to do the same.
Well, I think we all have the light of Christ in us, right, as everyone is born with it. But then we are also, as everyone has the potential to do good, they have the potential to do evil as well.
I think it's most important just to observe that Jefferson saw that oppressive state, the war of all against all. He saw that the people responsible for that were those in power. And we can see this explained in the scriptures too. If we read the book of Revelations and Isaiah, or even the Book of Mormon, we find that the reason why the civilizations were destroyed was because of those who were in power. It wasn't because it wasn't just one individual that destroyed it, it was society as a whole. Nevertheless, God has commanded us and given to us that light within each and every one of us to know the difference between good and evil, that we should love and serve one another and not be oppressive towards one another. And that, likewise, in order that all of our doings and all of our outgoings and incomings and outgoings are done in the name of the Lord, we ought to form societies which uphold that and which also guard against those who want that power and authority to war against us. Because we are assured by the prophets that that state does exist today. That there are those in power that cause, worldwide, that cause this war of all against all, from which we are called to be a part of, to be separate from. Okay. So, we are out of time. We had some great quotes by Madison and Jefferson, which would go into what they thought the solution was to an abusive magistrate who went outside the bounds of his duty. It suffices me to say that we should that his solutions were, well, we would view them as very radical. At least some of us would. But if you're interested, you can stay after and read them. But I think we'll conclude here. I hope you know that as we talk about these things, some of them you might not agree with or might have difficulties understanding, but I hope that beyond everything that we stay on the path to wanting to defend our liberty and freedom, because that ultimately rests in our obligations to one another and to God. And I bear testimony of that duty in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Okay, who wants to say